There was no room in the inn. In the 7th verse of that well-known 2nd chapter of Luke that was read earlier, it says, "And she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn." Good news and bad news in that verse. Birth of a child is always good news. It's exciting. You want to spread the word around. Probably the first thing the person does after the baby's born and the immediate thing settled in the hospital is to get on the phone and tell the in-laws and outlaws and everybody else you can think of about the birth. It's exciting news. That's good news. But this was a very special one, too, which made it even better, even more special that day. But then there was bad news. There was no room in the inn. And yet somehow that seems a little bit prophetic, because in many cases there's still no room in the inn, in the hearts of many people in the world today. So let's consider some possible reasons why there was no room and how it does apply today. First of all, I guess the most obvious, that probably the inn was full. They were not the first ones to arrive there. People were coming from many distances. Bethlehem was like a lot of our small towns and the maritime provinces and some of the West, where their greatest export seems to be people. And it's sad, but this happens. People move away from the small towns into the bigger centers, and that was no doubt true in that day. And so Bethlehem was a relatively small town, but many people were brought home because of this census. And so it was a busy town that time. It was crowded. The inns would be full, of course. And they probably had not made a reservation. We often hear that, isn't it, how important it is to make reservations when you travel. I never like to do that because I never know where I'm going to end up at night, so I don't want to plan ahead of time and not end up in the right where I want to be, or have to cut short days so I can meet a reservation. I don't know what their reason was. Of course, communications weren't the same as they are today, and they hadn't made reservations anyway, and they got there, and the inn was full. Well, what can you do about that? I know a lot of people like to talk about the innkeeper turning them away, you know. I don't know if there was an innkeeper. It doesn't say anything in the Bible about him, but just says there's no room in the inn. But it was no doubt full, and you can't just turn people away. How would you feel if you just getting nicely settled into your motel room and the owner came along and said, "You're going to have to leave. There's another couple here, and we want to give them the room." You'd say, "Well, hey, this is my room. I got here. I paid for it," etc., you know. It wouldn't go over. And I can sympathize if there was an innkeeper or whoever was in charge, that what could they do about it? If the place was full, there were just no more rooms. And so they had to be turned away. I remember one time we went down to see Glenn when he was in university down there in Kankakee at Olivet, and it wasn't his graduation, but it was graduation time, and he was in the choir that was singing, so we wanted to be there for it. And we went down and went to a motel where we often went, and said, "Sorry, we're full up." I said, "Do you know of another one?" He said, "No, I think everything's full in town. There's some big boat show or something on, regatta there, and there are a lot of people in on top of the university graduation and whatnot." He said, "I think all the motels are full." So we did try one other and got the same answer. "No, we're full and everything is." But we do have in our chain a motel just a little ways out of town, another village, and they might have one. So they were good enough to phone and ask, and there was a room there. And so we got shelter for the night. Otherwise, we might have been out in a barn somewhere too. But what can be done when it's full up? But what about today? Many have such full lives that there's no room for anything or anyone else. These things they're full of might be good and they might not be good, but just life is so full. How often do we hear this said that, I'm just so busy, I just can't keep up with everything, and don't give me any more to do, I'm already overloaded. I don't know if COVID is kind of an answer to some of this. It slowed things up a lot, and we don't have as much to do that way because of many things, but we're not too happy about it, are we? We'd probably like to be busier. But a lot of people, they're just too busy. And unfortunately, there's no place for Jesus. Their lives are so full up that they just don't have room for any more in their life, and they don't have any room for Jesus. 2,000 years later, there's still no room in the inn for Jesus. Well, it may have been too full there in the inn. Another thing, there may have been the wrong activities going on there. Inns are often party places, and it could mean that there was a party and various things going on that would certainly not be very conducive to a young, very pregnant woman and a man who was just very much of a working man. How would they feel in that setup? Notice it does say there, at least in the King James Version, which I was reading, there was no room for them in the inn. Might have room for others, taking a different approach here now. Might have room for others, but there was no room for them. They just wouldn't belong there. It's a lifestyle, the things that were going on. And if that were the case, perhaps the authorities, the innkeeper or whoever, they have realized that and said, well, this wouldn't be the place for them. That poor lady won't get any rest here, and it's not the proper place for a family like that. There's just no room for them here. And on the other hand, it may have been Mary and Joseph that perhaps looked what was going on and said, this is no place for us. We better move on, and if we can't find anything else, maybe we'll find a stable. Now, it doesn't say there was a stable there either, but we usually think of them ending up in a stable. And at least to get a shelter somewhere rather than a rowdy place like that inn seems to be. Whichever way it was, there was no room for them there. We ran into a situation like that one time when we were traveling on holidays going through Quebec. I'm not picking on Quebec here if anybody's from there, but it just happened to be that it was traveling through Quebec. And we thought we'd stop at this town, just going by the map, And when we got there, it was smaller than we thought, and there was only one hotel there. And as we drove up, got out of the car, we could hear some pretty loud music banging away out of the place. But we sort of took a look in anyway, and we could see from the doorway that there was a party or something going on, dancing, and the people there driving around or whatever, show going on. And we thought, no, this isn't the place for us. Even if we have to drive on. There was no place for us there. Now, I don't know if that building, that inn, or whatever they called it, motel was full or not. We just didn't check up. We thought that this isn't the place for us. And so we drove on and found another town up the way and a place. Made it later to getting in than we expected. But at least we found a place. Well, that may have been the situation here. that inn maybe just wasn't the place for them. And again, bringing it up to date a bit, there's some people are ashamed of the life they're living, and perhaps rightly so. They'd say, well, the way I'm living, there'd be no place for Jesus. Maybe you witness to somebody like that and try to encourage them to open their heart to let Jesus come in, and they say, well, not in my lifestyle. It would just upset things too much. And I don't want to make that change. I like the life I'm living, even if I'm suffering a lot from it. Aren't people strange sometimes? Sometimes we put up with a lot. We know it's doing us harm, but we go ahead anyway. And there are some people like that. They're living such a lifestyle that they know that it would be no place for Jesus in the style that I'm living, and so don't want to open up to let him in. They need to clean up. Often they say, well, I've got to change my life first. Well, the best thing is to let Jesus come in, and he'll make the changes for you if you want him to. We don't have to change to let him in. We need to let him in and let him do the changing. But there are a lot of people like that because of their life, they don't admit Jesus. Just as in that day, there was no room for them in the inn, no room for Jesus. And one other possibility, quite likely in fact, was that they just didn't expect them there that night. Oh, they were looking forward to the Messiah coming. All the Jews have been looking forward to the Messiah for centuries. Each time there was a new baby, there was that hope that maybe this will be the Messiah. But it didn't happen. Went on day after day. And they should have been looking. And you would have said that when they saw a pregnant lady there, that thought may have come to them. Could she possibly be bearing the Messiah? But no, they weren't expecting him then. Maybe sometime. Oh yes, we're expecting the Messiah. He's coming sometime. But we didn't expect him then. And we're expecting the Lord Jesus to return to this earth one day. He said he would, and he kept all the rest of his promises, and we're sure he's going to keep that promise. But when will it be? Oh, it could be any moment. But are we ready for him? Are we expecting him? Are we living in expectation of his coming? Or are we thinking, oh yes, he could come and he will come, and yes, it could be any time, but it won't be now. I've got to get things finished. I've got to get those presents open tomorrow. I've got to get this or that done. I'm looking forward to the next year and all that takes place there. Yes, there's many things that can interfere with our expectation. Despite looking for the Messiah, they weren't expecting him when he did come. And Jesus has a way of coming when he's least expected and into the individual heart too. They didn't expect him. They didn't know this family. This wasn't somebody that they were expecting to have come to the place. It seems that they had spent their lives up in Galilee, the northern kingdom. There perhaps were other people that had frequently been to Bethlehem, and they may have got to know them fairly well, and if they came, there'd be more desire to try to find a spot for them. But who were these couple? Never saw them before. Young couple. No, they weren't expecting him. And so they were not ready for him. Again, another illustration, when we were out west there, the church I had, we had a indoor camp meeting, met at the church, and we brought in a couple of speakers and a singer each year for them. And the camp meetings always started at Friday night, and so most of the workers would arrive Friday morning, early afternoon. The odd one might come on Thursday night, set us so ahead of time. But this one year we came home, I think it was Wednesday, may have been Tuesday or Wednesday, and found a fellow sitting in our carport. And we didn't know who he was. Pulled in. He came over and introduced himself. He was one of our speakers. Somehow he was quite an unusual person. He was a missionary in Senegal, Africa for many years, and he didn't go in the normal way. In fact, I think he'd applied at a mission board and been turned down, so they just bought a ticket and went over on their own to start a mission work there. He was a very different fellow, and so it wasn't unusual for him to come and arrive early, but we didn't know him, and we were quite surprised. My wife had things basically arranged and the rooms upstairs, but there are a few things that she needed to do yet. She had a couple of days to do them, but here he was. We weren't expecting him. And so we had to kind of hustle around and get some last-minute things done. Sometimes people come when they're not expected. And that was the case with Mary and Joseph. They came when they weren't expected. And so there was no room for them. Yeah, we had a room set aside for Brother Stanley. Just hasn't quite ready for him yet, but but it was reserved for him upstairs. But not there. They had no expectation of them coming. And so there was no room. And what about today? There are many people that maybe say, well, someday I'm going to become a Christian, but not yet. I'm not expecting to do it yet. There's those who say, yes, I believe that Jesus is coming again, but not yet. Don't expect him now. Don't expect me to become a Christian now. Don't expect me to change my life now. Don't expect whatever might be needed there someday, but I'm not expecting it now. That's the way many are living. And time slips away, and suddenly it's too late. And there may have been a time after this child was born that the people of Bethlehem may have wished that they'd made room for him, but they hadn't, because they hadn't expected him then. What about us? Have we made room for Jesus? Is there room in our hearts? The song says, there is room in my heart for thee. But have you room for Jesus? Will Christmas find you worshiping him? Or is Jesus left out? No room again. It's an old song, and we're not going to sing it today, but it says, have you any room for Jesus? Room for pleasure, room for business, but for Christ the crucified, not a place that he can enter in the heart for which he died. Room for Jesus, King of glory, hasten now his word obey. Swing the heart's door widely open. Bid him enter while you may. Have you any room for Jesus?